So greetings and welcome to today's educational program in the Managing for Quality lecture series. This is number 15, Quality as a Social Responsibility by Dr. Gregory H. Watson. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with ASQ's Quality Management Division. So today we have a great pleasure of hearing from Dr. Gregory H. Watson. Please join me in welcoming him to our stage here. Dr. Watson has degrees in management, law, and industrial engineering. He's an 18-year ASQ fellow and past chair from 2000. In 2020, Dr. Watson was elected as an honorary member of ASQ, its highest honor. Previously, he has received the ASQ Distinguished Service Medal, plus the Lancaster Medals, Crosby, and Ishikawa Medals. He's been named an honorary member by 19 other national quality associations. Dr. Watson has been a frequent speaker at ASQ national and divisional conferences, twice for the Quality Management Division, and has delivered this webinar series for QMD since early 2020. He's a former quality executive with Hewlett-Packard, Compaq Computer, and Xerox, and he's coached executives in quality transformations at Nokia Mobile Phones, Toshiba, ExxonMobil, and over 20 other companies. Dr. Watson is the only Westerner to be awarded a Deming Medal by the Union of Japanese Scientists and Engineers, the W. Edwards Deming Award for Dissemination and Promotion overseas, in 2009. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Watson. Greg, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doug. Tonight we're going to talk, this is our 15th lecture. We had a series of 12 lectures that were on what I would think of as the fundamentals of quality, and then the last 6 are basically extending quality beyond what we would think of as the normal boundaries of quality. And today we're going to talk about quality as a social responsibility. And when we do this, what we're going to see is that we have seen that quality is changing a lot. The world is changing. Everybody's experiencing it in spades this year, if you will. We've had the COVID situation happening with the pandemic changing our lives. We've also seen massive digitalization and changing our communications and even the way we're doing remote learning and training. So how will quality change us in the future? And this part of the series that I'm doing is actually opening up a new topic, which I'm calling Macro-Quality for Humanity. And so we've had now, this is the 3rd lecture in this, which is Quality for Social Responsibility. The next 3 will talk about quality as a human right, political policy, and then for our manifest destiny. And what we're doing is we're extending the lessons that we've learned from micro-quality, talk about quality of the organization. How does this work in terms of a global level for the benefit of humanity? So today I'd like to begin by starting with what do we mean by responsibility? So responsibility is a duty or obligation to manage or control activities assigned or assumed to their successful conclusion or outcome. So there are 10 new obligations of management. This is my restatement of Deming's 14 points, if you will. But establishing a constancy of purpose, that's strategic direction, vision, and intent. Establishing a new philosophy of managing the organization. So getting away from a pure economic sense and having a more holistic sense. Building quality outcomes into the system of routine working. Expanding business conditions beyond just economic results. And improving processes for planning and execution of work. Provide appropriate training for workers at all levels. Lead to keep management organization leading at all levels. So we expect that every organization is full of both leaders and followers, that we're doing both in every occupation we have. Driving out fear and encouraging experimentation, which is this idea of getting away from risk adversity. Breaking down all barriers to communication and cooperation, and engaging everyone in the program to transform the organization. As Deming said, the greatest waste is failure to use the abilities of the people, to learn about their frustrations and about the contributions that they are eager to make. Now, if that's responsibility, what do we mean by the term social? So social relates to formal or informal interactions of humanity and implies some organizing based on collective affinities. So the word social, it's derived from the Latin word soci, which means allies. According to Karl Marx, humans are intrinsically social beings who cannot survive and meet their needs unless they associate in some ways with others in a form of social cooperation. Now, Marx took this to the extreme, and he defined such relationships as necessarily independent of free will of the individual. So they were dictated by the organization. Max Weber, on the other hand, had a concept of social that was a subjective meaning, which is given by the actions of individuals as they work together. So it's an opposite position to Karl Marx. But what we see is social decisions define who gets to choose and also who benefits in an organization. So social questions deal with public interest, the allocation of decision rights or power to various components of society at large or an organization. When we talk about social responsibility, it implies a duty to act in the best interests of everyone. So social responsibility means that individuals and companies have a duty to act in the best interests of their environment and the social systems within which they operate. So this can be perceived, if you will, as a moral imperative to act for the greater good of the world and its citizens. Now, social responsibility has become embodied in organizations as what we call today corporate social responsibility, or CSR. And this involves acceptance of responsibilities for acting in ways that not only obey laws and regulations, but provides multidimensional benefits to the social systems in which they operate. So we see that corporations must act in ways that accumulate social goodness across all sectors of society. It is not an option, it is an obligation. Now, one term that's related to this is the idea of social justice. And what we see is that individuality yields to equitable distribution of opportunity, wealth, and privilege within a social system or society. The social justice operates in the social system by applying the rule or principle of majority rule, while consistently upholding the rights of the minorities in that system. The social justice is seeking balance and harmony between individuals and society. Social justice seeks to eliminate prejudice, discrimination, and oppression from society by distributing social power in a way that enhances the chance of all people to have a comfortable, safe, and productive life. The social justice is informally recognized through what is called a social contract, which is established through custom, law, and regulation. So to achieve social justice, a nation must come to agreement on transparency of information, policy for equitable treatment, and fair laws. Now, when we talk about this, we're also talking about something we call value. So value is typically considered to mean economic value of something, which is then measured in monetary terms. From a quality perspective, we can think of value either in the sense of goodness or badness. Badness in value represents a mood of waste. It may represent an overspending for something, investing more than is needed in a resource, or a financial loss that occurs from material leakage or bad production. Additionally, value may be described as extrinsic or intrinsic. The judgment of a monetary value in an economic or commercial terms may be in either of these categories. An intrinsic value is something that's valued for its own nature, such as nature in itself or morality judgments about lifestyles. Extrinsic value tends to be goods or services that are exchanged in markets. So monetary judgments and valuations are really a poor indicator of the merits and benefits of ideas, objects, or experiences with intrinsic value. And there's judgments we tend to make on a moral basis. Now, when we think about this idea of a social contract, stewardship and ownership are embedded in social contracts. And these have their origin in the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his Discourse on Inequality from 1755 and the Social Contract in 1762. And these established the philosophical foundations for the concept, or even current concept, of social management as written in the Declaration of Independence. And there we see that it says all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. So a social contract is defining the boundary of the legitimacy of a state to impose its power over the rights of its individual citizens. And so this is one of the concerns that we have even today about how do we interpret where is the power in a state. Now, we have to think about this in our context in terms of quality. And I'm going to repeat the definition I've been using throughout this series, that quality is relentless pursuit of goodness, coupled tightly with persistent avoidance of badness. So we have both quality in terms of deliverables, quality in terms of process and services, and it's also in terms of the avoidance of failure conditions or bad conditions related to any of them. The core principles of quality as interpreted socially are these 5: respecting people in diversity of race, religion, and nationality, respect the scientific gains of those who've walked before us, protect the environment which sustains all of us, abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm, and practice 2 things in all activities: either help or do no harm. So goodness that is careful not to create unintended consequences as it improves our life is really what we mean by quality. Now, we have to learn to manage risk in this area. And we've seen in the prior lectures, we've talked about Anthropocene risk, or risk based on the things human beings have done. And we see risk is basically 3 things. It's either a hazard, it's an exposure, or a vulnerability. And we have to learn, how do we deal with these things in this environment in which we find ourselves? So managing risk will become a dominant emphasis in quality to continually improve the environment as well as the world in which we live. So quantum physicist Richard Feynman said, if we want to solve a problem we've never solved before, we must leave the door to the unknown ajar. We have to be open to seeing things we've never seen before. Now, an insufficiency of past laissez-faire efforts is important to understand. So goals that had no measurement and no comprehensive collection of data that indicates progress are only good intentions. They're not actually a plan or a strategy to make an improvement. So this is sometimes called managing by the numbers. And it calculates and assigns monetary value to evaluate relative worth of things. But that is a conundrum. When it comes to making economic values about anything that's inherently intrinsic value, how do we assign the value of these things? So what's the value of a national park like the Grand Canyon? Can it be reduced to the value of the minerals available for extraction, or the water available for agriculture, or the tourist income that it provides from bus tours? So what's the value of peace of mind that comes from watching a glorious sunset from the deck of the El Tovar Hotel on the southern rim of the Grand Canyon? It's priceless. And that's one of my most favorite experiences in life, was to watch that sunset from the El Tovar Hotel. Monetary judgments and valuations are a poor indicator of merits and benefits of ideas, objects, or experiences that have intrinsic value. So what perspective do we judge? An American journalist who is considered a pundit at his time, Henry L. Mencken, made this observation: the chief value of money lies in the fact that one lives in a world in which it's overestimated. But we think too much of what the monetary value of things is. So social value is based on equity and morality, or what we call moral economics. It's not based on monetary economics. And this is a major distinction for us to make, because once we realize that, we're really realizing the 2 systems in which we judge how things are important to us in life. So we need to apply a moral economy, not just a monetary economy. So consider some of the basic principles of what does shareholder supremacy mean. In a money economy, we have an economy where money is used as a mechanism for valuing exchange of goods or services, without a concern for ethical distribution of value or even the quality of the exchange. It's just a straight, here is supply and demand and money provided and the exchange happened. But it's not about the quality of what was actually exchanged. Moral economy, on the other hand, is an economy based on fairness, goodness, justice, as opposed to one where the markets are managed independently of such ethical concerns. Now, Ratan Tata, the founder of one of the largest conglomerates in India, made this comment. He says, apart from values and ethics, which I have tried to live by, the legacy I would like to leave behind is a simple one: that I've always stood up for what I consider to be the right thing. And I've always tried to be fair and as equitable as I could be. I think that's a very interesting perspective for a major business leader in a major economy in the world to put forward as a guiding principle for the Tata Group.
When we ask this question, what is the value of peace, health, or security? This is the view from the south rim of the Grand Canyon from El Tovar. And when we take a look at it, I'm reminded of the saying by Warren Buffett: price is what you pay, value is what you get. And as you get older, I'm now 73 this year, and I take a look at this, for me, the value is much more important than the money. And I wouldn't mind seeing that view again and enjoying it for a few hours again in my lifetime. So I've come to part one now. We're going to talk about understanding the quality design behind, if you will, corporate social structures. And we start decomposing the definitions of responsibility. So fundamentally, responsibility is a duty or obligation to manage or control activities assigned or assumed to their successful conclusion or outcome. So it's in decreasing order of implementation priorities. We have some definitions. So one is economic responsibility. So this is primary responsibility in most organizations. This is the responsibility to make a profit or at least to recover costs. And if a company does not receive more than its cost of capital, it's essentially weakening its future financial values. Legal responsibility. Corporations are granted the right to exist by government. So every time we have a company founded, there is a charter or a approval of that and a license to operate granted by government. And one of the things it says is that you as a corporation will obey all of the applicable laws and regulations applied to you, and that you will be in business for a particular purpose. We also see ethical responsibility. And this is the responsibility to do what is right, even if it's not required by law. And this requires ethical actions and a responsible culture. And finally, we see philanthropic responsibility. So this is the responsibility to contribute to advance society's projects, even when they don't directly relate to generating financial benefits for a corporation. So typically, it's first things first. Make money, obey the law, do good, and then finally share the benefits. Now we think about the related concept of sustainability. Sustainability is an ability to maintain or control an outcome to a certain level or range of performance. Typically, it represents the intersection between economics and ethics. So we can have economic or business sustainability. This action places value on the long-term stability and financial solidarity of an organization over short-term volatile types of benefits. And this pathway avoids calamity and excessive risk to assure reasoned development and growth. Social sustainability is different. This cultural component values balance in the lives of people and the way that its employees maintain their own personal stability. So it seeks to distribute opportunities and wealth as broadly as possible among the people in that society. Third, we see environmental sustainability. So this principle recognizes that resources of the earth are limited, and if they deteriorate significantly, it will destroy the quality of life for future generations. So this is what we start thinking about macro-quality, all goodness, no badness for all of planet Earth, integrating all of those components of sustainability. And we see this is sometimes called the triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps, planet, people, and profit. So Ben Cohen, the founder of Ben & Jerry's, in his book, Values-Driven Business, made this comment. He said, without question, the balance of power on the planet today lies in the hands of business. Corporations rival governments in wealth, influence, and power. Indeed, business all too often pulls the strings of government. Competing institutions, religion, the press, even the military play subordinate roles in much of the world today. If a values-driven approach to business can begin to redirect this vast power towards more constructive ends than the simple accumulation of wealth, the human race and planet Earth will have a fighting chance. And what he's basically calling for there is what we're calling macro-quality. Now, there is a model of corporate sustainability, or building an organization's long-term strength. And we see there these 3 elements. One is social, about the people, that's nurturing a supportive community. The second is the environmental, or the planet, and we're talking there about a viable, enduring environment in which we live. The third is business or profit, where we're talking about sufficient, equitable economy. And so in each of these intersections, we see that there's a socio-environmental overlap, there's a socio-economic overlap, and there's environmental economic overlap. And when we come to the core of all of them together, that's when we start seeing this need for sustainable development. And we're talking about building all of these concurrently by the way we structure organizations. So this is a macro-quality system. It's delivering all of this. So all goodness, no badness for planet Earth in each of those dimensions simultaneously. So we have a revised focus, and that is expanded stakeholder theory. The stakeholder theory is a mirror to sustainability obligations. So we see stakeholder theory is operating by influencing corporations from the outside as outside in rather, as opposed to financial backers or shareholders who just seek this financial optimization outward or giving the money to them. So stakeholder theory asks three questions. What are the legitimate claims that external stakeholders can impose on a business? What rights do external stakeholders have with respect to decisions and actions of a corporation? And what are the kinds of responsibilities and obligations that external stakeholders can justifiably impose on business obligations? So the theory is that those whose lives are impacted by an organization have a right to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. And again, this is going to be a part of what we're going to talk about, macro-quality. So we're expanding the customer concept to include all stakeholders, not just the commercial customers of an organization. We start seeing that there are some models for implementing social responsibility. And so what models are available to consider in establishing business is basically, there's three. There's a conflict model. This is the traditional CSR model where we see social value benefits for society are believed to be in conflict with shareholder profits. In this model, there are additional requirements that see that these extra CSR requirements are added as costs, and it's not reasonable to pursue such direction unless there are some government incentives like subsidies, or there's some legal regulatory requirement to do it. And so from this perspective, people would argue that business is a trade-off between this economic and the moral values. The second is a value-added model. And this basically holds that seeking to derive revenues from CSR decisions and policies by appealing to a market segment of socially conscious consumers and managing risks of negative press or publicity. And it holds that CSR can actually result in increased organizational profit. And therefore, we have people wanting to invest in the green company, if you will. The third model is called multiple goals model. And in a radical departure from tradition, there's a theory that socially based decisions are not based to economic values, that corporations have goals that lie beyond monetary gains. And this is, again, one of the tenets we start seeing coming out in what we're going to be calling macro-quality. And we start seeing there's a whole maze of different ideas that are happening and words that are coming out that we start seeing thrown around. And so the challenge we have is, how do we design an effective macro-quality strategy that delivers all goodness, no badness for planet Earth? Just this last year, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, they talked about the universal purpose of companies in what they call the fourth industrial revolution. And for us, we think of this in quality as Quality 4.0. And this is from the manifesto that they issued, which was signed by over 300 CEOs of major global corporations. And it says, the purpose of a company is to engage all its stakeholders in shared and sustained value creation. In creating such a value, a company serves not only its shareholders, but also its stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, local communities, and society at large. The best way to understand and harmonize the divergent interests of all shareholders is through a shared commitment to policies and decisions that strengthen the long-term prosperity of a company. And so what we see is now this is this is CEO responsibility for corporate CSR. So goodness must be delivered to all of the stakeholders, and we must do no harm for the stakeholders as well. This is Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. And he said the World Economic Forum is releasing a new Davos Manifesto. The first one was done approximately 50 years ago when we came off the gold standard. and they said there was a new way we had to figure out how do we manage. And so this was a group of executives and political people who were talking about that. Now they're saying this new manifesto states that companies should pay their fair share of taxes, show zero tolerance for corruption, upholds human rights throughout their global supply chains, and advocate for a competitive level playing field. Now this is interesting because this is totally different than what we've seen before, but it is very much aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is actually talking about this transcendental idea of quality for all humanity. And in the 17 goals, it's giving their operational definition for those things that must be achieved to establish this kind of macro-quality condition for all the earth. Now, I want to move into the final portion of what we're going to talk about, and this is what does accepting responsibility for improving global social systems actually means. And so social badness is ignored if we're keeping score. So gross domestic product, for instance, is the sum of all goods and services produced by a nation. But the weakness in the structure of these GDP calculations is that Taguchi's quality as a loss is not included. So the loss is caused to society after product's been produced or it's been delivered. But actually we start seeing that we often have to pay for that after the fact. But that's considered, even though we're paying for something that's gone wrong, we are getting a positive impact on the gross domestic product. So the cost of badness is counted as goodness. And this is what we call the broken window fallacy when we talked about the idea of quality as an economic imperative. So the cost of correcting pollution is counted as economic goodness and not recouped from the cost of production. The cost of wars are counted as positive economic goods produced. The production of inferior goods are counted as a good use of resources, not as a waste of the resources. The treatment of hospital-induced infection is counted as health care, even though it was occurred that in the process as a negative outcome of the health care being received. And so we see misallocation of costs results in an improper assignment of value in microeconomic treatment as true costs of failure, or corrective actions that are not borne by the producer of the failure, but they are borne by society as a whole. So it's attributed to Albert Einstein that he said, not everything that is counted counts, but not everything that counts can be counted. Or as Deming said, we don't know the cost of failure. So if we conceptualize between these two differences of macro quality and micro quality, we see microeconomics is talked about the theory of the firm, and it's often reduced to just price theory. And traditionally, the emphasis on quality has been on creating stability in production, eliminating waste, reducing defects, all of which is related to microeconomics. Macroeconomics refers to large-scale systems, economic operations of an industry, a specific society or nation, or global interrelationships between them. So macro quality is elevating the concentration of quality to the socio-technical systems that influence quality of life for humanity and those factors that affect this condition. So a shift from micro quality will greatly increase the depth of breadth also of quality activities. So macro quality is going to elevate the conversation about quality to the level of society, and it's going to concentrate on quality of life for all of humanity. We see that there are challenges in implementing macro quality. So we start seeing that there needs to be some innovations to occur. So macro quality must address weaknesses inherent in macroeconomics. So we have to deal with this broken window fallacy. How do we address the costs of repairs of poor quality, and how do we address correction of social costs? These should not be considered as beneficial to society, and certainly the producer of those failures should not get away with having society pay for the failures that they induced. So macro quality must define an interface between quality of the firm and quality of society. It has to develop some sort of meta standard for quality of life, suitable for all humanity that's based on sustainability and austerity, not on a model of conspicuous consumption, which has fueled a consumer-based society and individual financial objectives. So macro quality needs to develop so it's coherent and to fit that modern concept, doing good while doing no harm, all goodness coupled with no badness. The macro quality is the pioneering boundary for modern development of quality methods. It will require a systems approach to meet the current socio-technical systems that are facing humanity. Deming, in his theory of knowledge, was talking about the social systems that have not been structured to capture and learn about cost. Deming said the cost of quality may be unknown and unknowable. But how do we count these costs? You know, what is the cost of loss of joy of work or pride in production? What is the cost of resources spent for decision alternatives that are not in the best interest of society as a whole? What is the cost of obsolescence that's not borne by producer, but is borne by society who has to dispose of durable goods? And what is the cost of providing unresponsive end-of-life health care? What is the cost of providing substandard education? What is the cost of youthful optimism or enthusiasm in life when that's lost? And what is the cost of the unintended consequences of human activities? While it's often said that opportunity costs must not be considered in a decision, they are indeed real costs when it comes to global systems, and particularly when we deal with blocking the scarcity of resource applications, and we consume them in one area where it is not to the good of society. So in this system, we have to move beyond legal compliance. We see that corporations have been treated as people with responsibilities. And social responsibility means that people and companies have a duty to act in the best interests of the environment and the social systems in which they operate. And this can be perceived as a moral imperative to act for the greater good of the world. So corporate social responsibility is embedded in the things that organizations are looking for in general social responsibility. It involves acceptance of responsibility for acting in ways that not only obey laws and regulations, but provide multidimensional benefits to the social systems which they operate. Corporations are now considered as citizens, people protected by the 14th Amendment equal rights of the Constitution of the United States. Now, corporations have rights and obligations. And as Ralph Nader says, we must strive to become good ancestors. So there's some principles and obligations of ownership. One is develop strength for the long term. Constantly seek opportunities for improvement everywhere. Manage work as a fiduciary trust. Austerity delivers prosperity. Principles of stewardship. Treat all entrusted property as if it was your own. Do unto others as if you would they do unto you, the golden rule. Seek to fulfill stewardship's ethical code, which is integrity, service above self, responsibility, accountability, transparency, and excellence. And quality policies for process owners and individual regulation. So for process owners, it should be data integrity, target setting, work process review, continual improvement. For self-management, they call this in Japan Jisu Kanri, or Jikotai Kanketsu, JKK, and it's a self-regulated way to manage standard work and its improvement by accepting your own personal responsibility for ownership of the work and ensuring it is done right. So quality principles are aligned with the needs for establishing social responsibility in companies. So who are the stakeholders in a corporation? And it's surprising how broad this definition has become. We just saw generally it's quality of life of workers, shareholders, local communities, but this could be done with more inclusion, dignity, and equity. So shareholders involve a wide variety of people: owners, employees, customers, potential customers, suppliers, potential suppliers, local citizens, creditors who are owed money, government owed regulatory compliance or taxes, local business that are supported by employees and their families, or organizations who are competing with you for market share, and others who are subject to government actions based on company acts. So the reach of shareholder responsibility is wide, and its depth is quite extensive. Now, ISO 26000, Guidance on Social Responsibility, talks about the role of businesses in contributing in a positive way to the greater community in which it's operating. And it has these 7 different objectives in it. So organizational governance, human rights, labor practices, environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, and then community involvement in development. When we look at those together, we see that this is develop a stakeholder to focus area matrix. So which stakeholders care about which of these different focus areas? So which CSR importance are important to the key organizational stakeholders, and how are we managing them as a company? So we need to become clear about what we're doing. Now, ISO 26000 is not a certification standard, but it is written to give general guidance to what is meant by this. And it originally it was a document that was social accountability that was brought up actually, and Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's was one of the individual developers of this many years ago. And so now it's come into its own as an ISO standard, again, for us to think about and flesh out some of these as a way to learn what do we mean by implementing these ideas. There are also some policy goals that we can set for sustainability breakthroughs or high impact initiatives. So this Davos initiative has identified strategic directions that will help social responsibility and decision making. And so how is the future direction of your organization doing with respect to these initiatives? Now, back when I introduced the Davos Manifesto, there was a link there, and there's a whole group of information from the World Economic Program about this. And we start seeing here we have influence on stakeholders, very strong. I cut off the medium and low. And here we have impact of sustainable business performance, medium, high, and very high. And we see that there's these ranges here. So enabling digital talent at scale, corporate governance, climate change, data privacy, information management, diversity, inclusion, are all in this high impact and high benefit range. Technology for good, water, employee wellness, waste, emphasizing or energizing local communities. They're all in the next level of the very strong or high level of benefits. So we have to see, what is appropriate for each organization to do as they're seeking out how will they perform in their future. I come to sort of the takeaway lessons learned. And I have an open quote here from Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his Discourse on Inequality from 1755. He was basically a French enlightened philosopher who was one of those who was the thought leader for both the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And he made this comment. He said, the first person who, having enclosed a plot of land, took it into his head to say, this is mine, and found people simple enough to believe him, was a true founder of civil society. What crimes, wars, murders, what miseries and horrors would the human race have been spared had someone pulled up the stakes or filled in the ditch and cried out to his fellow men, do not listen to this impostor. You are all lost if you forget the fruits of this earth belong to all, and the earth to no one. And so Rousseau called us to think about, what do we really mean by ownership? What gives the right to pass ownership on? And how do we deal with this concept of ownership? So as we start thinking about this in the future, we will start seeing that we're raising questions that go beyond, if you will, the questions we've asked ourselves before about observing data in corporations and understanding quality through control charts. We're actually talking about the moral being of the people who work in the organizations and the societies where we live. So the takeaway should be, how should organizations address the needs of the society in which they operate, which also grants them the opportunities to succeed? So as a summary, social responsibility is becoming a larger emphasis of executive, and expansion in the meaning of quality to be compatible with a macro-quality emphasis requires mastery of the moral economy by quality professionals. And so hopefully what this webinar has been able to do is address the learning objectives that I had. To understand the meanings of social responsibility, social justice. Discover how quality pursued human good from its very beginnings. Learn dimensions in which quality life can be influenced to make improvements. And recognize how your organization can be engaged in global repurposing to achieve this type of benefit. And then consider issues that will drive social responsibilities in your own organization. And the mandate for us is that quality requires moral operation of the economic institutions of society so they will serve democratic advancement of humanity. So thank you very much. For those of you who want copies of the PowerPoint presentation, if you send an email to me, I will send you a PDF of this. I will also send a PDF of the full Davos Manifesto. that you might enjoy also reading as a follow-on. So Doug, have we gotten some questions?
Yes, we have. As you might have expected, your talk has got a lot of deep questions. I wanted to ask you, just to begin with, a number of people said, so there's so much in this. Do you have a reference list that you can share with us?
Not really.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, the fact of the matter is, it is so vast. I haven't actually put it together. I will be putting it together at some time in the future, because all of these lectures are going to be in a book that's called Managing for Quality. And that manuscript is in preparation now, and I hope to have it released by the end of the year. I'm in negotiations with a publisher. Actually, it's 8 books I have in negotiation with a publisher, and this is one of those. So that will be coming out by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with a pretty broad question here. What is the moral determinant? What are these morals we're talking about based on, and who decides what rights people have?
Well, this is a good question, because what it does is it brings out this question that Dr. Duran started raising when he talks about little q versus big Q. And I would go back to the discussions that were made by Chester Bernard in his book, The Functions of the Executive, in 1938. He was the first to raise this. And he says that every corporation has multiple conflicting moral codes. And some of those moral codes deal with the community in which you live. Some of them are established by religions. Some of them are established by your professional discipline. So we have a moral code actually for quality. Some of them are established as the moral structure of the organization or the company culture. And the problem that we have is there may be conflicts among those. And then how do you deal with those? And the question was raised, and I've talked about this before, but Chester Bernard came to the idea that what we have to do is we have to deal with getting a zone of indifference. That when we're going to say this is the moral code of a company, we have to figure out how do we do it so it's in a way that people can actually participate in that type of organization. And so he says that you can't issue orders or commands or requests in that sort of sense where you're asking people to go against their moral codes. So that management has to find this neutral zone where the people see the requests are in the benefit of the company and they're not personally against their own moral code. And this is a tough condition, particularly as we start getting more and more expansive organizations with global reach. And what that's doing is it's saying that we actually have to very carefully define what is the culture of the organization. How do we respond to this? And we're going to be talking more about this as we go along, because this gets into organizational politics as well, which is the subject of the next lecture, by the way.
Okay, thank you. So one question, kind of long one here. He says, it would seem to me that government is going to be the group that will define what social responsibility is and impose regulations that will reflect what they deem to be those responsibilities. That would require that these government organizations also are held to some responsibilities to ensure fairness and true value. Well, who would hold them responsible, and how does that operate with an open market system?
Well, first of all, I don't think the open market system is the appropriate system, but that's a whole different discussion. You have to go back to my qualities and economic imperative to start understanding what I mean by that. But if you take a look at this, I think that will regulation or will the dictate of government actually define those things? That's what's happening today. But I don't think that that's what's going to happen in the future. And the reason I'm saying this is not that I'm saying that there's going to be a whole different form of government, but what I think is that we have to come to some general understanding of what is good for all of humanity. We talk about this COVID situation now, and it's affecting the world. We talk about
as a pandemic. We're talking about climate change as affecting the world. We're talking about clean water. It affects the world. It's not just local boundary conditions that define nations. And yet, corporations are bound by those boundary conditions of the nations relative to national law about how they have what they call a model corporation and what they have to abide by, and then the local laws of that country. And the laws of the countries are not all uniform on these things. So what's acceptable in one country, we can even say corruption or bribery is acceptable in one country and its culture, and it's not acceptable in another. So how do we get that higher level of code? And this is, I think, one of the things that was hoped upon by having the United Nations and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I don't think they're perfect by any sense of the imagination. I don't think they're executed properly by any sense of the imagination. But I think they are starting to address the situations we need to think about when we're thinking about quality for humanity. And we haven't defined this yet. This is, beyond quality 4.0. Once we start understanding what digitization is, that's just a new set of tools. And we're not done with that. That new set of tools gives us even more connectivity. It gives us a shift, if you will, in responsibility for the quality community. And we have to think about how will we actually perform there. This is not defined. I've been talking with a friend of mine in India, and we have drafted what is a new version of the Quality Manifesto, which was actually first issued by ASQ in 1983. And in that Quality Manifesto, which we'll be publishing from the International Academy for Quality soon, what we see is that is, if you will, the call for how do we actually cope with this changing world and all these changing environments. And I think that the answer is there are no answers yet, that we have to determine what those answers are, but the quality community can grow into one of those groups that has the ability to unite across organizations and to create a common way of viewing these things so we can have that sort of integration.
Okay, great. So we're getting some specific and some different directions here. Here's one. So even if a corporation follows through with social responsibility, how do we manage an individual's self-destructive personality? In other words, the individual choices people make.
Well, we can't keep people from destroying themselves. I had an employee that once was very, very self-destructive, and no matter what that employee did, they always made the wrong choices. And no matter how much you guided them with love or with respect or with any sort of treatment, they couldn't seem to make a choice that was for their own good, much less the good of the organization. And I think we have to be careful and realize this will happen because not everybody follows, if you will, that same sort of social imprint. And so one of the things we have to do in organizations is start thinking about how will we build up this idea of mindfulness in the people as well as the spirit of collaboration in the organization. So there's two levels we have to work at. That is developing the individual and also developing them so they have a cooperative spirit. And this is part of, I'll come back to this in the last lecture in the series that I've planned. And what we're going to see is that how do you build that? It's a function of leadership, if you will, that encourages behavior. It's a function of understanding the nature of humanity. It's a function of how we establish jobs and how we accept our own ability to self-control the quality of our work. And when all of those things come together, then we have the capability to cooperate together as a team and express interest in others. And if we don't get that level of self-control, then we can't. And so that is effectively the job of the supervisory position, is to be able to bring people to that understanding and to monitor them and help them, coach them, if you will, mentor them to that condition.
Okay, we've got another question here that's just a little bit more broad. So coupled together, I'm going to combine, all right? One of the questions was, how would you implement this in, CSR in a small company? Another question that's connected to that is, how does a corporation decide what percentage of their profits represent fair, and equitable level of CSR. Another piece of that, this is all corporate related, how do you get companies to buy into this social responsibility? And the last one kind of summarizes that. The best strategies for dealing with those who strive for the bottom line instead of striving for quality goodness. So I put a bunch together there.
Okay, well, if you remember, I had the 4 levels of responsibility in the corporation, and the very first one that has to be satisfied is economic responsibility. And the responsibility there is that you have to make a profit or recover costs if you're not for profit. And what we mean by that is not just dollar for dollar. What we mean for this is also the cost of the future investments to replace what you've had that you're using up. That's a depreciation, if you will. It's the cost of capital to allow you to invest what's been invested in your company for the next round of improvements. So that's one foundation. You have to make money because you can't give money away that you don't have. The second level we get to is that we have to make sure that we follow and comply with the laws and regulations of the land. And then, so that's the second level, that there's no chance that's you can't dodge those as an obligation. And then we can start talking about our community. And the community starts with just the city we're in. So if we're a small business, it's our community. First of all, it's do we treat our workers as a family? You know, second is, do we treat the family of the workers as a part of that community? Do we treat our local town? Do we do things to support them? And so that's the next level. But again, we have to be able to make money to do those things. And then finally, the level beyond that is to actually donate money, like to educational firms or social situations, not government organizations and something like this, or encourage our workers to do so. And when the Chinese government actually put together their rule on CSR, they actually had those 4 levels. And they basically said, if you get to that philanthropic level, you have to have had these levels of profit goals. And so they've actually defined that in terms of their national system for social responsibility. And that is how they are now grading all of their large companies, like Huawei or Highly, Shanghai Heavy Industries, you know, in terms of how they are actually producing their value to the Chinese social system. Even though that system is indeed state-managed, state-owned, and communistic based, they still expect their corporations to behave in that sort of way. In terms of the definite percent that you make it, you know, you'd have to take a look at a company's books, and that judgment needs to be made by the management team based on where they are, what they need to do. And if you are a green company and you're working on green productions or green energy or recyclability or something like this, you know, then you have to think, you know, what is it that you are investing in that becomes part of your brand, if you will, and how do you create the goodwill that goes along with being able to sell in that particular commodity area. So there's a lot more to that pricing strategy, if you will, that allows you to get the revenue to do those sorts of things. So it's not a simple, easy question. And it's not one that will be solved by the quality community. It's one that has to be solved by the executive team.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're gonna stop our recording at this point and tidy up a few loose ends. Thank you, Greg, for coming and talking to us.